Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the broad applications of natural language generation, or NLG. This cutting-edge branch of AI is transforming industries globally, and today we're focusing on how it's revolutionizing some pretty diverse sectors. We often hear about marketing use cases, but today we're going to learn about legal, finance, operations, and more. And we're specifically going to explore how NLG enables automated generation of human-like text, provides abilities to summarize content, and makes previously long and difficult content generation processes expedient and efficient. And we'll do that from the perspectives of a startup that's harnessing those technologies to help make their product, and from two different technology services companies that apply techniques such as generative AI and NLG to help their customers solve important problems. For any attendees who aren't totally clear on what NLG is, let me briefly describe it. So natural language generation, or NLG, is a branch of artificial intelligence that converts structured data into human readable text. And it analyzes that given data, which is often coming from natural language processing. They often go together to decide which information to include, structures that information into a coherent format that represents a sentence the way we would normally read it, or a word in some cases, and generates text. It refines that for readability and coherence, and basically makes human readable text, hence natural language generation. So the applications of NLG range from automated reporting and customer service related content generation, personal assistance. You might have heard of something called ChatGPT, transforming all sorts of data into understandable narratives to save time, reduce human error, etc. So I'm your moderator for today. My name is Tony Ogg. I run a company called Nimble Gravity, and we are a strategy, digital, and data science consulting company. And we're glad to have two super innovative companies here with us today. Our European data science, business intelligence, and application development partner, Hiflylabs, and AI startup Legislaide, that's working to simplify the legislative drafting process, who are going to give us their hands-on perspectives on NLG. So first up, we have Kristóf from Hiflylabs. Hiflylabs is a collective of friends who all saw major potential in the insights and value you can glean from data. Their founders were pioneers in the field of data mining in Europe, a field which has now kind of given birth to data science, data analytics, data engineering, and generative AI, or NLG in this topic, are an increasingly important subject area for Hiflylabs in order to help their customers gain competitive advantage through automation, through streamlined business processes, etc. And now Kristóf's going to give their perspectives on how NLG is transforming the digital landscape across the industries they serve. Kristóf?
Thank you, Tony, for the introduction. Please just confirm once you can see my screen, because I actually have some slides for this. It should be coming up in a matter of seconds. And you should see the whole window.
We do. Yeah, looks great. Thanks, Kristóf.
All right, great. So yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm here on part of Hiflylabs. We are a business intelligence and data science company, and we've been implementing these large language models for natural language generation and conversational AI purposes, such as integrating ChatGPT or GPT-4 into enterprise knowledge bases. So we have, I believe we do have a pretty good idea of what's the current state of NLG, where it's going, and how it's shaping the future. So first, I want to show you some interesting trends from Google. This is the searches submitted for generative AI and ChatGPT. Well, we do know ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022. It's been unstoppable since. And what's interesting for both of these curves is that the peaks are actually weekdays, which means that people are more likely to use these solutions for work, for studies, than for leisure, which already gives us a pretty good idea of where this whole thing is going. And for example, this is Photoshop, and they have implemented a feature where you write a prompt, and natural language generation and large language models combined with computer vision, they are autofilling and modifying the input accordingly. So basically, you just need to input human text, and it will autofill the image accordingly. And we're getting to a point where it's impossible to tell what's real and what's not. And actually, I would be happy to read our audience's guesses in the chat. If you can guess which one is real, so were the cars added by AI or were they removed? It's a pretty good exercise. It's almost impossible to tell. But going back to NLG, because this is our focus today, currently the state of generative AI is that companies realize that they can make use of it, they can make money with it, they can cut costs with it, they can sell something with it. But the question is how? So these are huge large language models with billions of parameters, and compared to their sizes, our company knowledge base, our company data is very, very tiny. We don't even reach, an average company doesn't even reach 0.1% in terms of their data compared to what these huge models have amassed when they were basically studying the internet. So the question is, how can we integrate these models with our enterprise data? Do we want to inject our tiny information into these huge models and reorganize their billions of parameters? And the question is, not really. There are more sufficient ways. And currently, the state of generative AI is that we are exploring these ways. And as I said, we are implementing these pioneering techniques of how we can leverage ChatGPT in our companies. And the answer to that question is basically we can use some sort of smart engineering, which opens up possibilities such as communicating with your documents, hundreds of thousands of your documents, communicating with your internal knowledge bases, interacting with your databases, all with models such as GPT-4 or ChatGPT or any open source LLMs. So basically, imagine a situation where you would have to go to your data engineer to ask them to run a SQL query. Instead of that, you can just open up a chat window, type in your humanly phrased question, and models such as ChatGPT will transform that into a SQL query, trigger it, run it, and return you back with an output, and actually phrase them also in a human way, humanly easily readable way. And you can also imagine the same thing about your documents or your internal knowledge base. For example, you have a question to HR about what is covered in your insurance, or you're trying to find some answers in your internal wiki pages for some software that you don't really understand, and you don't really want to look over all of the pages, you just want to ask a question. Well, you can open up a chat window, you can trigger a search with ChatGPT or GPT-4, you can smartly access your relevant data or your relevant files that include this answer, and it will actually return you with the humanly phrased answer and the citation. So we do know that it didn't hallucinate, it didn't just come up with something, but it's actually grounded with your enterprise knowledge, and it's actually extracting information from your company itself. So I do believe that this is where currently we're at with generative AI. This is the types of projects that we're working with. So we're continuously integrating website chatbots, internal chatbots that are accessing some sort of information and trying to answer our clients' questions. So I think during my demo, you will see something like this where we're talking to a document. But for now, I think I'll just give it back to Tony.
Great, thanks, Kristóf. Yeah, next we'll hear from Pujit Mehrotra, the CTO and technical founder from Legislaide, who uses NLG in legislation drafting. And Pujit will share his insights on how NLG is driving change in a very traditional sector. Pujit?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So we're Legislaide. We make writing well-researched, excellent legislation really easy for municipalities, for legislation writers in municipalities. And the way we're sort of thinking about NLG and generative AI is that's kind of like autofill on crack. So we all have autofill on our phones, and it's kind of this smarter version of autofill that can sort of generate text from a large number of sources and with a variable amount of creativity. So as useful as that is for generating like new ideas, challenging ideas, and sort of finding new ways to write information really, really quickly, it's within applications, it's really, really powerful. So when we start using generative AI as sort of like a building block inside an application instead of just something that we're looking at the end product for, we start to unlock a lot of engineering power. And sort of the thing I've been sort of saying is that it's giving every engineer factually just the power of a department at Google. So we can build applications that previously took a lot of engineering effort and were conceptually really challenging to implement and time consuming to implement. And we can build them quickly, we can test them quickly, and you can have sort of non-technical people involved in this process, which was not something that was very easy to accomplish before. And as a result of that, we can take things that require a lot of stability and sort of wrangle this really new technology that's not super deterministic. It's autofill on crack. So sometimes you get some things that are a little haywire, just like autofill. But you can sort of, with some smart engineering, wrangle it in certain ways and get reliable output that's really helpful in really traditional contexts that require a certain sense of like stability and security. So that's what we're really excited about, is just the applications in terms of engineering, but also just all across the board, we're seeing sort of, we call it 10x improvements just across the line. And the question is really, how can you best use it to avoid tripping over yourself and sort of get the most out of it without exposing yourself to, I guess, risks of new technology and, making mistakes.
That's awesome. Thanks, Pujit. So finally, I'll share a perspective from Nimble Gravity. So NLG, and by extension and more broadly, natural language processing and natural language understanding, are particularly interesting because it changes the way we interact with computers to be much, much closer to the way we interact with one another. So from our perspective as a consulting company, that change in interaction brought about by NLG, NLU, NLP, et cetera, unlocks a few really interesting and important possibilities. So one, there's this whole new category of manual process within business or within our own lives that can now be automated. Things that were really difficult, like reading thousands of documents and summarizing them, or creation of customer-specific sales material, or the classification of product reviews. All of these things would have been very tedious to do with traditional techniques or to do manually. I've purposely included a couple of examples here where the generation is just a single word, perhaps, or a short sentence, to show kind of now these types of things that would have been really difficult to do pretty straightforward. So that's one. The second kind of unlock that we're seeing is one that Pujit touched on. That's sort of giving software developers, software engineers, bionic superpowers. So that 10x capability that Pujit mentioned, up to this point in time, probably the closest thing software engineers had was IntelliSense type ahead, which came out in 1996, various websites where you can go search for how to do something with software, or a search for an error message. So now that whole equation is changing. So I can write documentation comments in my code that effectively can become code. And that's changing a lot the way that software will be made. Personally, I think this probably makes really good software developers into amazing software developers. It may not change what maybe an entry-level software developer is able to do, but regardless, that's early days for this. And finally, the third kind of super interesting trend that we're seeing as our final perspective is this idea that a whole new spectrum of purpose-built software products is coming to market that is enabled by natural language techniques. Pujit will cover some interesting things from his perspective, but we're seeing, industry or function-specific software across supply chain, across entertainment, et cetera. So this is a whole new era, I think, of software solutions, solving specific problems or performing specific tasks for business and individuals that wasn't really possible before, which I think is super exciting. So now we're going to see some demos and see NLG in action. So starting with Kristóf, let's see some interesting demos here.
Well, I'm hoping it will be interesting. Again, please confirm once you can see my screen. It should be a Google Chrome window called Integrate Your Enterprise Knowledge with OpenAI.
Perfect.
All right. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use a document, for simplicity just one, but imagine you have all of your company's documents in one place and you're communicating with them. So I want to show you what is it. This is a fake product release of a fake laptop. It's a 3-page long document that we're going to start by uploading it right here. And basically we don't want to read so we want to know about the content of our files and of our knowledge base without directly reading it, hence saving a lot of manual time. So let's start by actually asking some very simple questions like what's the name of the product. And we do know this is a laptop, so I haven't shown you the original press release, but this is just imagine a press release of a fake laptop. And by the way, we are using GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, and we're going to be also using GPT-4, and I do believe Pujit will also leverage those models for his demo. So this is a laptop, so we can ask some technical questions without reading the documentation, like what sort of processor it runs on, and it obviously extracts this information from the text. This laptop is running on that sort of processor. Okay, but now let's ask it a little more open-ended question, like I may want to buy this laptop for deep learning. Is that enough for it? And basically it argues that yes, because it's got 32 gigs of RAM, which should be sufficient for most of the deep learning tasks. That's fine. Okay, I'm not going to argue with it currently. And we're going to ask an interesting question. When was Michael Jordan born? So it says that it doesn't know, which is basically a lie. All of these models, large language models, know when Michael Jordan was born, not because they are trained by NBA fans, but because they are trained on Wikipedia, which means that they know everything that Wikipedia contains. But currently, what's interesting here is that we want to ground our model's knowledge to the current context, which is just this file itself. So if something cannot be retrieved from the file, we don't want it to be answered, hence avoiding hallucination, coming up with weird answers, and trying to control the output of this generative AI, because as Pujit said, these are not discriminative models. We cannot really predict what they're going to say. It may change from time to time. Let's also check a use case of, for example, instruction. So this is a laptop, and I want to add a disclaimer to my press release that it may cause seizures upon excessive usage because of the video effects or something. So, and I don't really want to draft it from beginning, so I'm asking ChatGPT to help me with this draft. And this is what it comes up with. It mentions the name of the laptop, and it says something like, well, if you use it for too much time or fast-paced gaming, it may potentially trigger seizures, and it gives us some ideas of how to avoid it, which is great. I mean, we can take it as it is, or we can rephrase it, but it saves us a lot of time by not having to type it in ourselves. A third use case that I found interesting is keyword extraction. This is something that usually traditional machine learning models did, but generative AI can also be used for it. Here I'm asking ChatGPT to extract keywords, technical aspects, and product attributes. And I'm also asking it to structure it in key value pairs so that it's more easily readable. And what's happening here is basically once it's finished running, I have my category of product specifications, and it's very structured, like RAM, colon 32 gigs, storage, colon 1.5 terabytes. So it's all extracted from this document. And actually, when I read this, I already have a pretty good idea of what this product is about. So it's sort of like a quick summary by extracting keywords. But we can also directly ask ChatGPT to summarize our documents for us. This is a 3-page long document. So instead of reading 3 pages or 1,500 words, we can summarize the whole thing in 5 lines. And reading this gives us a very good idea of what this product is about. And now I actually want to show you some very interesting, more of sales and marketing specific use cases. For that, we're going to use GPT-4, which is the best model currently available, I do believe, everywhere. And we're going to try to use it for brainstorming. So let's try to imagine that we want to sell this product. And we have two target audiences. One is university students, and the other one is people who are starting out their careers. And we don't want to write the marketing and sales pitches by ourselves. We want to ask GPT-4 for help. And basically, we're expecting two messages, one for university students, targeting them, and the other one is for professionals. And we're hoping that GPT-4 has enough internal knowledge that it can add some useful information to these messages. Now, obviously, this is going to be a long output, so it's going to probably take a couple more seconds to run. And it's done. Thank goodness. So basically, for university students, the marketing approach could be unleash your potential with this laptop. And it has some nice phrases like, multitasking, research paper, creating a presentation, streaming your favorite show. So obviously it knows it's about students and the messaging is related to students. But when it comes to early career professionals, it mentions things like high performance, multiple tasks, deadlines, staying productive, advanced conferencing features. So everything that's important for people who are working their careers. So I do believe I'm running out of time. There are some very interesting use cases you can use, especially GPT-4 for, and you will see from Pujit's part as well. But I'm hoping I could give you some ideas of how useful you can make these models on your own data. So let's not forget, this is not internal data with GPT-4. We have added our own data and leveraged this model. So back to you, Tony.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kristóf. That's a great set of fascinating use cases. Pujit, why don't you jump into your demo? Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kristóf. Thank you, Tony. All right, I'll just pull it up here. All right, just let me know when you guys can see my screen.
Looks great, thanks.
Awesome. So this is Legislaide right now. And the idea behind this, we built this actually for our friend from college, and she works as a city councilor in Massachusetts. So she wanted to bring up some legislation on animal breeding and was having a tough time because obviously it wasn't a topic that she knew much about, but it was something that her constituents cared a lot about. So she really didn't have access to a full-time legislative aide. She shared one with her 10 other counselors, and sort of getting something on their schedule was difficult, and anything that you passed to them was very time consuming and would take a long time for that to turn around and happen. And she wanted to make that action on animal breeding happen quicker. So she sort of turned to us and was like, hey, this like ChatGPT thing is really cool. Is there any way that we can sort of use this to, help me understand where I should start with this piece of legislation? So we sort of made this tool for her, and she used it. And actually just last week, I believe, that ordinance got ordained in her city. So we're really excited about that. Now I'll just do like a quick demo of Legislaide right now. The concept behind it is really simple. We sort of present a form. You fill out the form with at any level of detail you want. It can be really formal legalese if you know what you're doing. But if you're sort of looser with it, you can sort of put in colloquial language and just use common English, and it'll still give you some really good starting points. So we're just going to go ahead here and fill out the form. And you can see the language here is not super complex. It's something, an average ordinary person can just use in their everyday use cases. And then we just hit generate down here. And this process can take a while. It can take a few minutes. So I just went ahead and, pulled it up earlier. Oh, it didn't like that. So we're going to go back here, and I guess I'll talk while it generates. Some of like the really cool things that we're seeing, especially in generative AI, is that instead of just relying on the output of what's being there, when we start using it as sort of a logical unit, and what I mean by that is you sort of give the language model some instructions and it gives you some output, but then you use that output to perform more actions instead of just displaying it to the end user. That becomes really, really powerful. And I think that's something that isn't talked a lot about in normal discourse, but I think that's where the hidden power of this technology really lies. And that's where we'll see engineers start to use it in a really significant way to build applications that previously only large corporations could build. And it's a really exciting time in that context. Fortunately, GPT-4 decided to grace us with its presence. So you can see here, this is sort of an ordinance formatted in the format of Denver. So I'll just scroll through this, and you can see it has the appropriate format in a vaguely appropriate sort of language context. It has the appropriate grammar, the appropriate sections. And so this is really useful to use as a starting point. And you don't have to start from scratch when you're writing legislation anymore. And usually when you're writing legislation, you try to find stuff from other cities. You have to run it through your own city code, the relevant sections that are there, and make sure nothing's conflicting, or if it is, that's specifically mentioned in your bill. And that process can be really time consuming because you have to make sure that there's no detail left out, that you've checked all the boxes. And that's a process that actually natural language generation is really, really great at, for just doing all of that tedious work and doing it relatively quickly, and sort of giving you a starting point that you can just sort of mold to your own use cases and get running really, really quickly. And the benefit to that is that when there's important legislation that sort of is in the pipeline and intends to get kicked down and sort of reprioritized for other things that are also important, those things can all happen sort of at the same time. And you can generate drafts of legislation and start these conversations both with constituents and other people in government really, really quickly in a way that was really difficult and inconvenient to do in the past. So that's where we're at. That's the Legislaide demo. Yeah. Okay, back to you, Tony.
Thanks, Ben. So having seen these fascinating demos, let's dive into a little bit more of a discussion portion of the webinar regarding how NLG is really transforming sectors, et cetera. So each of you showcased some really unique and innovative NLG capabilities. I'm curious how you're using these types of techniques within your own companies. Like how are you using this to make products or to do your own work? Maybe Pujit, if you don't mind, can you take that one first?
Absolutely. So it's obviously become a really, really pivotal part of how we work. And it's really different because, when we were younger and going through school, we didn't have access to stuff like this, but we found that it's really useful for challenging the ideas that we have. And what I mean by that is, instead of, say, generating a blog post, right, we'll be like, okay, here are the things we want to include in it. Now, articulate that for me in like one way. And then you can say, okay, articulate that for me in another way. And then you can sort of have this conversation with a model and be like, sort of argue with it and sort of play devil's advocate for yourself, or have it play devil's advocate for you, and sort of go through this writing process that sometimes takes a lot of time and requires a lot of mental energy and pauses. And you can get through that really, really quickly. And what that enables us to do is to have really productive sort of mental productivity, where we can accomplish a large number of tasks that would require a significant amount of sort of time and attention. And we can do those sequentially really, really quickly. So internally, that's, I think, one of the use cases that, or one of the ways that we're using natural language generation that I think, maybe is not so talked about, but it's really, really useful. It's sort of not using it to generate the end content, as I'm saying, but sort of still generating it on your own, but using it to inform that thinking process and have a structured way so that you have the sanity checks, you're making sure that, nothing's falling sort of outside of the line, and being able to do that in a way that allows you to continue doing that difficult work throughout the day.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks. And Kristóf, how about you? How are you employing, or how is Hifly using these techniques yourselves?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to what Pujit said. So a lot of our colleagues like to use these models, not for the end product itself, but just to give ideas, or as Pujit said, for example, marketing content or something, we have our terms and ideas that we want to include in, and we just need some smart phrasing or articulating. That's obviously one use case. The other use case is what my demo was about. So as we grow, our internal knowledge also grows, and we don't necessarily want to, search within thousands of documents. But if someone has a question, then we just want to leverage these models that have access to our internal knowledge, and then the whole searching and retrieving or cross department communication can be just more efficient, in my opinion.
That's great. And both of you, I think, are hands-on software developers. I think that's a safe assumption. Have you used generative techniques in the products that you're making, in the software that you're running, or are you leveraging these things today?
Okay, well, since I have the mic, I would say I have used them, but it hasn't transformed my original way of working. So I have tried Copilot, for example, which is basically code generation technique, and I'm experimenting with open source solutions, such as usually you wrote the code and then you had to write the documentation, which is always the worst part. But now you can write what you want your code to do, and you can hope that these generative models will get it right, and it will give you a base, but then you will have to engineer it yourself. But again, for time saving purposes, it's a great experiment.
Yeah, and I'm of the same mind as you, Kristóf. I also tried Copilot. I didn't find it particularly. It was an interesting tool, an interesting experiment, but it wasn't transformative in the way that I think a lot of people hoped it would be. But for me, where it comes in is sort of this: when you're dealing with unstructured data, right? So text that can be in any sort of format, it can be in any sort of way, and getting meaning from that in sort of like a structured way, and being able to build layers of that and build an application on that, I think is something previously, wherever I've worked, is sort of like a challenge that we got to at every point. And it was always a struggle, because we were like, okay, this is a really hard thing to do, and it's going to take a lot of time and people, but we don't really have the resources to do it, because there's other things that require our attention that, also, are urgent. So, but now it's sort of something that's very easily accessible. And that's sort of what I mean when I say that every engineer sort of has the power of 10 engineers, or the power of a department at Google. It's that you can build these applications that understand text, and sort of any manner of text, and sort of derive applications from that, and sort of have these models either steer themselves or talk to a human to allow them to navigate these sort of different kinds of text that we see outside in the real world, and whatever users throw at it, and sort of handle them, which it has always historically been the challenge when you're developing these applications. So it's in that sense where things that previously required a lot of engineering effort, or in certain fields and certain tasks, language models kind of just take that and solve that. So it's just another tool on your toolkit, and it just happens that this tool is very broad in its application purposes and can be used in a lot of different ways. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see, like, especially in the open source realm, more tooling crop up that sort of makes this sort of process even more convenient, than it is with language models.
That's great. Last question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. As you think about, I'll call it adding the additional tool to the toolkit, as you said, like what recommendations or what advice would you give other organizations looking to add that new capability to their tool set? Do you want to take that one first, Pujit?
Sure, I can take that. And I think it's always unique to the organization, right? In terms of what they want to do. I think most organizations have some sort of data, or they rely on some sort of research or data that they think would be really useful, but it's sort of not clear how to scale that, right? So say you have your market research and there's a lot of it, and sometimes it's not always tabular data that you can just, hop into a database or an Excel spreadsheet and just query. Sometimes it is just, masses of text, or maybe it's a bunch of scientific papers, right? And I think in those use cases, it's, as Kristóf was mentioning earlier, it is really helpful to just quickly spin up an application, sort of use those documents as a source, and have the model run through that and sort of write your queries in natural English and use that as the starting point. And I think when we begin there, and we can like use this throughout like any department. It's not isolated either to engineering or marketing or finance or anything. It's anyone can use this. And when you start doing that, I think you'll start to see places where it would be useful to have, more checks in place or more sort of polish on top of the model. And I think that's where, organizations can start to see, okay, this is where, it might be worth investing a little bit of engineering effort to make this tool for internal use like even better, to enable productivity across the organization.
That's great. What's your perspective, Kristóf, on any advice, recommendations?
Yeah, so I think currently we're getting approached more and more, usually with the message that, hey, our management heard about ChatGPT, how can we use it? Which is a great question. And I do believe that no company should limit themselves, or no company should eliminate the possibility of using these models. Everyone should walk with, an open mind, because what's available today, but you don't necessarily think it will solve your problem, it will probably solve it by tomorrow. So just keep an open mind. Think of any ways that you have manual tasks, or tasks that are being repeated, tasks that could be automated, or something that you could help, like just whenever you use Google for search or Bing for search, or if you're a coder and use Stack Overflow, all of those could be enhanced with generative AI. So I would think just be open-minded, and just if you don't know how you can use it, contact us, for example, and we can try to help you, identify your entry points.
That's great. Thanks, both. So to kind of wrap up our exploration, let's open up to Q&A. There's a chat and a question function at the bottom. We have a few questions that were asked in advance that we'll start with, and then we'll start to pick up some of the questions as they come in. First question was, this is all very new in some ways. I think we were experimenting with GPT-2 when it was 2019, so not super new in some cases. How do you both envision the next 10 years or the next 5 years? Where do you see this going? Where's this headed? You want to take that one first, Kristóf?
Sure. So this is very, very exciting. I mean, I think everyone is talking about this as it's like a 5-year story, but let's not forget it's like a 5-month-old toddler that we're still trying to learn how to deal with it. I mean, it's getting everywhere. So computer vision, video, audio, text, all of these are trying to explore ways of how they can use generative AI and also how they can be combined for different things. So one of the things that comes to my mind is, for example, augmented reality, or just think about, ChatGPT can act like a person. So you have no limitations in what you can create in terms of different scenarios for different simulations. You can simulate people, you can simulate entire conversations between real people and fake people, and this is something that I don't think I have the the knowledge to guess what's coming, even in the next 1 year, not just next 10 years. But one thing is for sure, I mean, we have to catch this. We have to like stay on board, because this is one of those things that if you don't keep up with it, it's going to be really difficult to know what's going on, even I think by the end of the summer. So just an advice again, try to keep up with it and always explore ways of how you can leverage it.
That's great. And Pujit, what's your forecast for the future?
Sure. And I think, we could talk about it by industry, for instance. I think like the impact on, IT, programmer tooling, cloud providers is pretty clear. For instance, I think we'll see a move away from the serverless trend, just because it is less convenient to sort of deploy these AI applications using the current serverless model. But also in terms of tooling, like just developer tooling, I would be shocked to see, not having more tools that make working with AI, and in particular natural language generation, more convenient. But I also think, I've been talking about this, like using it as a building block in applications. I'd be really shocked to not see that used in almost every like technical product 5 years, 10 years down the line. And it's just the power that sort of enables in terms of analytics and the business value that you just get out of understanding things without having to like code for it is ginormous. So I'd be shocked to see that not happen. And I think we're going to see a lot of the products that we use today, I think, still exist. It's just that in the back end, they're delivered more efficiently and sort of more precisely. For instance, advertising, I think, definitely changes because of natural language generation. And we could even see that bleed into other fields, other AI branches. For instance, vehicular automation. I think there are use cases there that aren't necessarily immediately apparent, but in terms of understanding image from text and sort of generating text based and sort of generating information based on what's going on, right? And the thing is, when you're driving and when vehicles are moving around, it's really obviously really, really difficult to sort of account for all of those situations, and having those in a language model that can sort of understand all of them definitely seems like something that would be useful as a starting point to start seeing progress over there. And I think as a result of that, regulation actually also changes, not necessarily directly on the front of natural language generation, but in terms of the effects that it has on different industries. And we might start to see products that have capabilities that might be undesirable to society that we might want to regulate, or we might start to see, progress on certain fronts with certain hardware related technologies that start putting, swaths of ordinary people at reduced work or, out of work. And it might be a good idea to regulate that going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. What about this question, enterprise software? And so, I'm imagining like at the extreme end of enterprise software, you might have an SAP or an Oracle or some Salesforce, et cetera. How do you view Gen AI or generative AI in those kind of software domain?
Hopefully Oracle prices go down. But we know that's not going to happen. So, but no, I think it's interesting, right? Because the problems that we see don't necessarily go away. there's certain challenges that enterprises might have an easier time doing, like solving on their own. But I think in general, the concept of still like having enterprise software and being able to deliver very expert, sort of tailored consulting services and sort of personalized services is still going to exist. I think the human aspect there, right, and understanding other people is something that's very important. And as I'm saying this, I can imagine sort of a scenario where you're taking some sort of voice thing and sort of translating voice to text and training that on sort of large swaths of psychological, research, and sort of using that to understand human beings sort of in an automated way. But I really think that it's not necessarily going to have the same effect that we might think of like a technology that's transformative in terms of how that enterprise, how those enterprise services are delivered and the manner that they're delivered in, and the cost and pricing. I think it might change necessarily like the challenges that are being targeted, but it's not necessarily going to change, I think, the paradigm of it.
Got it. And Kristóf, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that question as well. And also one other additional question would be, how do you tell when AI or NLG is a core and differentiating feature versus just an advertising buzzword? Like how do, so the enterprise question, and then how do you tell if it really matters or if it's just there to be cool and maybe sell a product? Like how do you think about that?
So in the meantime, I try to answer one of the questions. So yes, it might be scary that these models learn on Wikipedia, but basically they're trying to learn the English language. And then once that's done, you're trying to fine tune their knowledge so that the fake information is filtered out, but fake information is still written in good English. So, and that's the first important part. Going back to this enterprise question, how generative AI will affect it, I think it should be integrated, and I think it should be expected that it's going to be integrated in it. I think just a couple of days ago, Google dropped the feature that Google Docs, Google Sheets, they have a generative AI function. So you can create tables or make some functions or make some visual filters based on human text. So if you turn away from it, I think you're missing out. You need to think of, I mean, if you're an owner of an enterprise software or something like this, I think you need to think of how you can integrate it, and it should just make your product more useful for your clients. So just one example I could give here is one of our clients as customers are always submitting tickets because they can't find the correct information in the pool of documents, and by integrating a chatbot on the website, we can help these customers, just a lot quicker find answers to their questions. And your second question was about what exactly?
So when is AI or natural language purely an advertising feature, buzzword? So personally, sometimes I see, now with AI, and I don't really believe it in all cases, but I'm curious to get your thoughts, Kristóf, on, how do you tell if it really matters or if it's just a buzzword?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think it's got like a life cycle. So when ChatGPT came out, people were trying to hack it, find all the wrong information, trying to break it. And it wasn't about, how can I integrate into my software, my company? Now the question is this is exactly like, I want to use it for my company. I want to use it for text generative purposes. So I think during the early stages, this is about marketing. If you're working with these models, that means you're part of it and you're actively engaged. And then after some time is passing, then you start to realize, well, I actually can make money with this. I can actually cut costs with this. And then you have to benchmark, how much time you can save for a software engineer and for them to spend their time on more valuable things than to write code. Or how much time can you save for a marketing department so that they don't have to write all sorts of marketing messages and blog posts, and instead they should focus on strategy or something. So you always have to quantify, but I think there's always a phase that is just, for quite some time, it's just sexy to be part of it, and then you can actually find business value in it. So, but you don't want to miss out again.
Okay, great. And there's a question, maybe best answered by Pujit from Mark Baisley regarding, so I'll state the question as follows. There is a history of the internet that these things have been built on, these language models have been built on. And when you talk about Legislaide and you have the training from, sort of the copy of the internet, I'll loosely call it, how does the prior legislative session history feed into the next legislative setting? And how do you think about the, using what was previously decided in ordinance or in legislation in the next one? How do you think about that?
That's a really, really great question, because it is one of the challenges that we're working on is, not all of the legislation that was written in the past was great and stuff that necessarily should be used going forward. Sort of the manner that was written in terms of, the legalese and stuff is still stuff that, we want. At the same time, though, there's other factors that we have to take into consideration, and it's certainly a challenge. Trying to make sure that we're not outputting things that are necessarily harmful or things that are nonsensical in the context that our users are trying to generate. And yeah, sort of one thing that we're implementing that is challenging and I think will become more common just broadly as these AI implementations occur is this thing where the language models can sort of read their own output and sort of grade themselves based on the criteria in another context that we've given them and say, okay, hey, is this output okay? Or is this output not so great? And we can sort of reinforce that with feedback from users. And I believe that's something to the effect of what OpenAI is doing for ChatGPT. We just do it in a much more specified context with feedback from experts, just to make sure that we're doing the right things and we're not leaving out things that we shouldn't, and that we're including things that we should. We definitely rely a lot less on sort of the open internet than most other generative AI companies do. We have a particularly narrow focus on municipal governments. So we're typically only looking at documentation from there. Our exposure to the online internet might come down the line when, if our users ever are interested in sort of public reactions and, public impact that certain legislation had, that's a place where we might start seeing more exposure to the internet. But for right now, it's mostly looking at these historical documents and just, making sure that they're what we expect them to be and that they're not sort of breaking the generation just by adding in, data sets that are older or newer.
Makes sense. What skills do you think will be necessary for future professionals as the AI and natural language generation technologies advance? Or maybe if you were in university today, what course do you think take to leverage these technologies? Kristóf, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So I believe I still know a couple of people who can't really Google efficiently. And it's sort of like an expected skill that you should have. And you should do the same with ChatGPT. I mean, and these models. So you should get a feeling of how you can prompt these models so they give you your desired output. It's not just a question answering tool. You can structure the output. You can make them act like different personas. You can try to make them act as teachers or act as professionals. You can explain things to a toddler with them. So you just need to see the full potential of these models. And if I was young, which thankfully I still am, in university, I would, well, it's a good question, because these models can also be used to sort of create your work and help you with your homework, which is a little scary. But thinking aside from any sort of regulation, I think it's better to allow everyone to play with them and see it for their potential. But it's also important to keep in mind that you don't want to take away your own creativity just because something can do it, which you were supposed to do yourself. That doesn't mean you should always let it do it. It's like a calculator. I mean, until a certain age, you're not supposed to use a calculator because you're supposed to know how numbers work. But after that, no one's gonna integrate in their brain. So I think that's a good analogy, hopefully.
Pujit, do you want to add your thoughts to it?
Yeah, I'd say along the same lines. Like when I learned about ChatGPT, like it was sort of, my initial reaction was the same thing, just sort of not limiting, your creativity or allowing yourself to be intellectually, dishonest with yourself whenever you're using them. But I think like if you were in school and in university and you really want to work on advancing AI and sort of those technologies, and you were in sort of like a more technical context, I would, start immediately building with these technologies. Just any tool that you can sort of think of, even if it seems ridiculous, just try building with it. But also just start taking like the math classes and like the high level computer science courses that are required to sort of understand AI and sort of try to derive your way there of, how these technologies were built and sort of what goes into building that, and start maybe like looking into research for that, because it's one of those times in your lives where you can just invest in research and learning, wholeheartedly and sort of go into that. I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. So with that, let me pull up a screen here. Hopefully we can all see that. So thanks everyone for joining today. We hope this has been educational, has broadened your understanding of NLG's potential and how it's revolutionizing various business sectors and industries. We're very excited about this. Obviously, we do a lot of work with this, but we're hopefully created some excitement amongst the audience. And a big thank you to both Legislaide and Hiflylabs. We appreciate you helping enlighten the audience on your perspectives and with your demos. If you want to get a hold of any of these companies, here are some email addresses and some domain names: hiflylabs.com, legislaide.com, and nimblegravity.com. So stay tuned for more sessions in the future from us, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.